Have you ever wondered if a single, massively misunderstood word could literally strip an entire global religion of its mandate for systemic, societal justice? I mean, what if the way we've been reading some of the most famous texts in human history has been completely skewed? What if a basic translation error actually hid a much more radical, structural truth from us?
Well, hello and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us today because we are going to unpack some truly profound research. Today's explainer dives into Mark Bates's 2026 paper, Weightier Matters, Jesus and the Paradigm of Biblical Justice. Honestly, I was completely blown away when I read this. We're going to explore the deep linguistic roots of biblical justice together, focusing on the true meaning of the word tzedakah. And I've got to warn you, it might just completely change how you view the intersection of faith, economics, and power.
So, let's set the stage. For centuries, post-Enlightenment Western thought has basically conditioned us to view righteousness as something entirely private, right? We think of it as this passive, internal, moral perfectionism. It's all about personal piety, being a good person behind closed doors. But the original ancient Hebraic word tzedakah means something entirely different. Tzedakah is active, it's public, it is all about delivering justice and actually stepping into the fray to set things right.
All right, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the translation tragedy, then uncover the true meaning of tzedakah, look at the 4 pillars of justice, move on to the temple confrontation, and finally, talk about living out active justice. Let's dive in.
Part 1, the translation tragedy, a crisis of justice. You know, modern Christianity is often haunted by this artificial, almost invisible wall. On one side of the wall, you have the private realm of personal faith, and on the other side, the public realm of structural social justice. A lot of folks just assume these two have nothing to do with each other, basically relegating advocacy for the poor to quote-unquote secular politics. But Bates's research points out that this divide isn't biblical at all. It actually stems from a profound translational breakdown. See, the primary Hebrew words for justice appear hundreds of times in the text, but standard English Bibles routinely translated Tsedaqah as righteousness. This projected a modern Western concept of individual moral perfection right onto the ancient text. And at the same time, they translated Mishpat as judgment, making it sound like this cold, punitive retribution. But in reality, their Hebraic intent was active deliverance and the legal, structural vindication of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. It's a massive translational tragedy, and it completely changed how millions of people view their ethical obligations.
Part 2, the true meaning of tzedakah, justice from below.
Now, to really grasp this, we've got to step out of our modern, Western mindset and step directly into the ancient Hebraic cognitive environment. We need to look at what these words actually meant to the people who first heard and wrote them. Tzedakah is not about sitting quietly and being a good, moral person. It is active, delivering, and community-restoring justice. Think of it as the dynamic action of intervening to set things right. It's about lifting the oppressed out of bondage and reestablishing broken communal relationships. Essentially, it is justice from below, a very deliberate bias toward those who lack institutional power. And this isn't just about earthly politics, by the way. It's cosmic. Take Psalm 82, for example, where God indicts corrupt spiritual powers. The text says, "Give justice, mishpat, to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right, tzedakah, of the afflicted and the destitute." In this supernatural worldview, earthly injustice is literally a manifestation of corrupt cosmic powers. So executing concrete structural justice for the poor isn't just some nice social program. No, it is literal spiritual warfare designed to reclaim territory from corrupt entities. That is huge.
Part 3, 4 pillars of justice, the Isaianic paradigm. So when Jesus arrives on the scene, he doesn't act as a passive moralist. Not at all. He operates directly in the lineage of the Hebrew prophets. He famously rebukes religious leaders for ignoring the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, elevating ethical demands and structural justice way over mere ritual mechanics. Researchers David Gushee and Glen Stassen actually identified that his ministry followed a specific, 4-fold paradigm rooted in the prophet Isaiah. Those 4 pillars are: 1. Economic deliverance, 2. Dismantling domination, 3. Stopping violence, and 4. Restoring outcasts.
And we can see Jesus powerfully enacting these pillars all throughout his public ministry. Let's break it down. For economic deliverance, he inaugurates his work in Luke 4 by proclaiming the Jubilee, literally canceling debts and liberating the oppressed. For dismantling domination, he heals on the Sabbath, publicly exposing and bypassing the religious elite's monopoly on divine access. For stopping violence, he teaches the Sermon on the Mount, introducing active, nonviolent tactics to actually strip oppressors of their power. And for restoring outcasts, he shares table fellowship with tax collectors and marginalized people, enacting this radical form of inclusion. So, across dozens of public encounters, Jesus is systematically confronting first-century socioeconomic exploitation.
Moving on to part 4, the temple confrontation, the climactic praxis.
Okay, so all of Jesus' individual liberative acts built up incredible momentum toward one specific location. Now, we often think of the Jerusalem temple as just a really big church, right? But we have to totally reframe it. The temple was actually a highly lucrative economic monopoly run by a very wealthy aristocracy. Peasant pilgrims who came had to exchange their money at exorbitant rates for Tyrian coinage, by hugely inflated sacrificial animals, and honestly, worst of all, the temple treasury acted as the central bank of Judea. It literally held the debt records of the peasant majority. Elites used these records to seize land when poor farmers defaulted on their loans. It was an absolute engine of systemic wealth extraction.
So, keeping that in mind, when Jesus marches in and overturns the tables, he quotes 2 specific prophets. He says, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations." Now that's Isaiah, and it's condemning the exclusion of Gentiles from their only place to pray. Then he adds, "But you have made it a den of robbers," and that's quoting Jeremiah. This dual citation isn't just a random angry outburst, it's a precise, targeted condemnation of both their exclusionary practices and their profound theological deception. And here, folks, is the ultimate aha moment from the source material. What does den of robbers actually mean? In ancient Hebrew, the phrase is miarat parizim, and it is not the place where a robbery happens. Actually, scratch that, it's the safe house where bandits retreat after they've committed their crimes, so they can hide out and feel secure. Jesus is exposing a massive system of cheap grace. The elites were out there exploiting the poor and extorting peasants all week long, and then they were retreating into the holy temple on the Sabbath to offer sacrifices and say, "We are safe. God is on our side." Jesus' action here was a direct, calculated assault on structural, institutional injustice. Finally, part 5, living out active justice, key method element 9.
So where does this leave us? If we reclaim the true meaning of tzedakah, if we truly realize that Jesus was demanding active, structural transformation rather than just some private, passive morality, how does that change what communities do today? This builds perfectly into modern practice with what Gushee and Stassen formulated as Key Method Element 9, or KME9. This is a prescriptive standard for communities right now. It says you must always assess any situation by asking, is injustice present, and how do we achieve a just outcome? Justice from below, specifically regarding greed, domination, violence, and exclusion. It basically demands that we stop ignoring the very systems that create the suffering in the first place. On the ground, this requires a major shift. We have to move from mere transactional charity to structural initiatives. Let me give you an example from the source material. A community might run a food pantry, which is obviously a good thing, but transactional charity alone ignores the predatory payday lenders right across the street that are exploiting that exact same low-income neighborhood. Practicing true tzedakah means establishing structural initiatives, like setting up alternative microloans and actively advocating for municipal regulations to stop that financial extortion. It's not just about treating the symptoms, it's about dismantling the institutional structures that perpetuate the vulnerability.
Wow, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, haven't we? From the tragic mistranslation of Tzedaqah to that dramatic structural showdown in the Jerusalem temple. Justice, in this biblical context, is clearly not just some secular political additive. It is the active, delivering heart of the entire narrative. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Knowing that true righteousness actually requires community-restoring action, how will you practice the weightier matters of the law in your own community? Are you going to settle for passive, private piety? Or will you step into the public square to embody active, restoring justice? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the big questions and dive into the source material to see what else we've been missing.